What's up, y'all? So the fun part, check, sounds working. The fun part about researching resets is that, at least in the US, they happened everywhere. So they most likely happened in a local city that you may live near towards. And you can go investigate these things yourself because there's still remnants of those times. San Francisco, I lived for a little bit in San Francisco growing up, and San Francisco is a really weird place because it just has a really weird vibe, and it's the same vibe that like I got from being in Shanghai. It was the same vibe I got in Japan, same vibe I got in Nicaragua. Just like something wrong happened there. Like beautiful places, but definitely have weird vibes. San Francisco for sure has a very strange vibe. And when you're there and you walk around and you look at the architecture, you can tell that there has been multiple periods have gone by in this city's history. And and so since I got into researching resets, I found out that San Francisco is one of like the main reset cities in the US. Chicago is another one of a major reset city. But San Francisco has actually had probably multiple resets. San Francisco is built on the San Andreas Fault, right on the middle of it, right on a small peninsula. So you got a lot of people in a very small amount of area. So
we have mainstream accounts of these resets. I mean, there's earthquakes and fires from, 1890 to 1906. There were seven
major fires or earthquakes.
And we're talking
in this
about
very
city
small area.
Destroyed. I mean, one of them
before 1906.
Yes.
Like before.
Yes.
Before the one we were all taught in school. Before the earthquake and fire that they shoved down our throats in elementary school, at least for both of us growing up in California, they shoved the earthquake of San Francisco down our throats, as well as the gold rush. So finding out, starting to research this stuff and finding out that San Francisco is a reset town is no shock to me, always having a very weird vibe from a place. So the mainstream says that basically San Francisco was empty before 1949 or 1948 when the gold rush started, and was basically had like scattered buildings, a very small town site, and that's it. And basically from 1849 to 1870-ish, 1880-ish, which is all of these photos, 1890s, 1900, turn of the century, that era, the next 35 years after the gold rush, they allegedly built all of these buildings. And if you're not questioning it, if you're some kid learning it in school, you're like, okay, well, I don't know who built those buildings. Someone did at some point, so that's all that matters, really. But while researching resets, that's kind of, you don't think like that way anymore. You think of like, okay, how did we build all this stuff? And when these guys were allegedly out in the mines working. Allegedly they were, most of them were illiterate, definitely don't know good math enough to be a contractor. But these guys were all out in the gold fields working, and allegedly this massive metropolis was built with the biggest buildings, most beautiful, perfect buildings you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, and tiny populations too.
Tiny populations.
It makes sense for these buildings to be built this magnificently, hugely.
To this day, it makes no sense when you go up north why the cities are so big.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, you got to start. Okay, so another thing, so the 1949 gold rush, big deal. that's when allegedly San Francisco boomed. And then in 1906 is when the big earthquake and subsequent fire we are all taught about happened. Even though 6 times before the same thing happened in San Francisco, allegedly in its very short lifespan, which makes you kind of wonder, why would you keep building there? Especially bringing massive populations there when there is plenty of land everywhere else. Why build on top of each other in San Francisco in this tiny, dangerous place? But anyway, we're not, So, yeah, no, totally different discussion. So then this earthquake and fire happens, which we are taught in school. It was a earthquake, and then a fire happened, and then the whole town was vaporized, basically. And which you buy. You're like, okay, well, there's lots of earthquakes in California. They knew San Francisco had earthquakes. They probably shouldn't have built, like all that stuff comes in where you're just rationalizing it. And that makes sense. But then once you dig into the story, and you dig into the mainstream story, and then you dig into like the mainstream accounts, and then you start digging into like the really deep stuff, which is like people's personal accounts and photography and videos of the era. And then just if you think about, the behavior of everyone during this time, it seems very, very, very unusual. The courses of actions the city, the state, and the military, and the police took, and the people, and you start wondering, what's going on here? This San Francisco place seems really strange to me. Like when I grew up there, when I visit there, I'd be like, this place is strange. Like, this is a strange place. Because it's just overall one of the strangest places, the most underrated, strangest place on the planet, San Francisco, once you start deeply diving into, these photographs and stuff. But anyway, like, there's account, like if you type in San Francisco earthquake personal accounts, and you start researching, you'll get these accounts that are like ridiculous. They're written like poetry. Like they're written like someone who's a writer at a school was given a task to like, hey, make this really exciting sounding story about how tragedy struck a large city and everyone got together and just like killed it and rebuilt the city in an amazing amount of time. But she's really looked into the accounts. She's pointed me at some stuff, and I'm like, what is going on here? Because there's a very obvious difference between the accounts written by the mainstream and the actual personal accounts of people on the street. You get these very fanciful stories from the mainstream, and then the people on the street were confused as all hell about what was going on in San Francisco at the time, because it's very, very unusual to learn about what was going on there during the time and what actually caused all this, the destruction of San Francisco. When I was a kid, they taught us it was all earthquake and fire, because, everyone built all their houses old-timey and it just couldn't handle the fire. Or they built their houses not knowing they were in an earthquake zone, and, which all ended up being BS. But yeah, like, there was this lady, the first lady you read some stuff to.
Yeah, the Eyewitness account. Yeah, so first of all, she talks about being surprised how cheery everyone looked despite there had just been being an earthquake and being a disaster.
The more of these things you read, you start seeing this people noticing that the general population was acting as if it was no different of a day, or were almost gleeful at the sight of their entire city being blown apart, which is very unusual, to say the least. You would think that, maybe, you'd think like you'd be seeing people in misery everywhere. But when you look at these photos, not these especially, because I think this is of the World's Fair, but you'll look at photos and just people like like, it's so unusual. Like,
Very
stuff
odd,
like
yeah.
this, like...
There you go, yeah.
Like, what? They're taking a selfie in front of the city burning down, you know? And so you see, and then a lot of the video footage, there's like a lot of documentaries and stuff of the San Francisco earthquake. And you just don't ever see anyone really sad. You just see everyone like they knew it was going to happen almost.
At least there's a
or
part
at
of the
least a part of the population knew they were kind of in on
they were
something.
better off for some reason than the rest of the people.
Yeah. Definitely.
Like this one woman who was giving her eyewitness account. I mean, she was talking about how there were rumors of the ferries being burned down and people for days and days and days
stuck on the peninsula. San Francisco is a peninsula. You can't leave without ferries or getting out a certain way. So they didn't know they could leave, but it was like they told everyone the ferries burnt down so they can get their people out first, you know, type of situation.
It's kind of like as if you.
It's like another 9/11. It reeks of false flag. And even the earthquake part of it reeks of psy-op, because we haven't even talked about the dynamite. So the craziest thing for me to find out, I think for both of us to find out, is that most of the why is basketball on all of a sudden? I don't even watch baseball. That was baseball, huh? So the firemen immediately started dynamiting the city, and then the military showed up and took over the dynamiting, and they dynamited the whole town.
Well, not only that, let's just not glaze over. They instilled martial law. They put out a notice for everyone other than beer to pour your alcohol down the drain.
There was like a
instituted prohibition, martial
law,
and that's, you know, I don't remember.
And we're kind of controlling how people could go in on.
Yeah.
We have these personal accounts we've written. We've read that. Where they're like, I was forced at bayonet point out of my building by military, and they blew up my building, basically. You know, like,
and this is
what is going, like, if let's say this happens now. Let's say LA has a big earthquake, right? Los Angeles, the city I live in now. Then the government shows up and starts blowing up buildings. Like, wouldn't you kind of question that? Like, is there some sort of rationale behind blowing up the most beautiful stone buildings in the world? Like, the other thing, I mean, we're not going to get really deep on this, but like when a old stone and wood building burns, usually all the wood burns out of it and the structure stays. You know, and so San Francisco has all these buildings like this, so they go around blowing them up to save the city. Just really weird. And it wasn't like you had a few groups of people, like government, like the cops were trying to, or the firemen thought they knew what they were doing, and the government had to step in and be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? You know, it wasn't like that. You had authorities fighting over being able to dynamite the city.
Oh, and I forgot about this part. Not only the alcohol thing, so they also, any cars in the city...
Oh, were commandeered.
To transport the dynamite
all over the city.
It was that
so
important.
Anyone who had it, there weren't that many cars back then.
Yeah.
So all the cars were straight and you could find video... It's like film and pictures
of
these guys putting dynamite, and just these idiots, like these dudes running around with rifles and boxes of dynamite blowing up buildings. Like, I didn't hear that. And then there are more accounts of basically, a lot of the accounts you get is, oh, I was woken up by a huge explosion, you know? And once you start taking into consideration they're dynamiting everything, you know, maybe could there possibly not have even been an earthquake?
It causes a lot of confusion, regardless of what actually happened. If they start explosions happen.
If you tell everyone to go dynamite every other building on the block, and at 5 a.m. light the fuse, and they all go off, people from the 1800s aren't going to know that it's an earthquake or their building being blown up or bombed.
Or adjacent.
Bombed?
Yeah, who
even?
knows? I mean, at that point. So
very unusual.
It's a deep rabbit hole. There's many eyewitness accounts.
Very unusual.
This is a virtual exhibit of the San Francisco City virtual exhibit. You can look it up.
You can click around to and look back in history at every building that was there. But that's it's very, very, very unusual rabbit hole. And
it goes deep.
And you can go investigate it still because there's still some buildings left. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if we hit everything. I think we did. I mean, just about, but. I mean, it's just
impossible.
But so the thing is that while San Francisco is a pretty big reset town, like I said, every major city was possibly built around a star city, which
just older stuff.
Yeah, old stuff.
Older things. A lot of these, there's got to be at least one building in every major city across. But
if you listen to the mainstream, they're like, oh no, the United States was just empty and there was just some random savages and we showed up and just made it awesome. When the more you research, and I know it sounds a little crazy if you haven't done the same research, but the more you research, you're like, there was stuff here long before the timeline that they're saying. And the deeper you look at these things, especially the things they pointed out to us in school, you dive deep on those and you're like, wait a minute, this is complete BS. And why was it so important that they taught me this stuff in school? Like the 1906 earthquake. But anyway, so it's just, and then you, this stuff, this gleeful, oh,
that's them.
If you loved your city, New Yorkers, oh man, New Yorkers love their city. They would never laugh at it being burnt down, or they would never be happy about that. We saw what happened on 9/11. And it's seeing this glee, hearing all these accounts of there being a very strange population. And then seeing pictures of people and watching videos of people almost celebrating and watching gleefully as the city is dynamited, I could only compare it to one thing, unfortunately, that's happening these days. And it just kind of makes you wonder, what are we just seeing a cycle of things happening, and are there just resets every once in a while, and there's just but this is the only thing I could compare that to realistically is watching this happen. So I don't really know, but look into it, guys. We'll talk to you later. Peace.